Hey, this is Darryl Webster from Modern Workplace Change. What if AltspaceVR and Microsoft Teams meetings had a baby? Now, bear with me on this one. I was part of a conversation on Clubhouse just this following week, just wondering about some of the use cases for AltspaceVR, and we've seen some conferences recently use it within web browsers, and you don't even necessarily have to use a headset. So I was extending some thoughts into this, and I thought that I'd use it from this week's episode of Back to the Board, or Briefly from the Board. I forget what I call it these days. So let me just take you through to it. All right, I want to just start off by talking about some of the challenges to do with Microsoft Teams meetings. We're all experiencing them. Actually, it doesn't even have to be Teams meetings, it's any kind of meeting. We're limited by audio. And what happens often within a conference call or a large meeting, any size meeting really, is that we have a bunch of people and we're all on the same level effectively. We all, when we go to talk, it's one person at a time, right? So one person talking, and that might be the presenter or someone who's facilitating the meeting, and the other people generally tend to go on mute, and they can then come off mute and talk. Or in some smaller meetings, then you might have everyone off mute if the background noise support this, and you can talk one at a time. But as the group tends to grow and the conversation tends to get more enthusiastic, you get all sorts of collisions, you know, where people are talking over the top of each other, and then there's this no you go, no you go, and even more so when we're talking at a distance. And certainly over the internet, you can get some of those delays. I know I experienced that with some people that I talk with too. So there's a couple of ways that we kind of manage the audience. And one way, of course, is that we can put everyone on mute, and we manage that by doing that ahead of time. We can do it as a organizer of the meeting, and we can set up the meeting so that it makes sure everyone else is on mute. The other thing, let me just get a bit childish about, I haven't done this for a while, we could raise our hands. So as we're raising our hands, this is another feature that we can use to control the audience. And whether we are just using it as a way of, okay, raise your hand and come off mute, or we're actually controlling that in a moderated sense, where everyone's on mute and you have to raise your hand before you can have the ability to come off mute. So that's two ways that you can at least manage the conversation, but it still requires one person at a time to talk, and that's where the limitation really starts to kick in. So if we think about that in a Teams meeting sense, we'll have a presenter over here, and you know, they are presenting whatever they're presenting. And I know that this isn't really the true reflection of what a Teams meeting looks like on screen, but you have people attending, they're watching, maybe they're passing comments, they are collaborating, or if it's a webinar, then they're just consuming that. Now I want us to think about that. You know, that's where collisions happen, and it's a limitation of Teams. One thing that we do have in our arsenal is that we can use breakout rooms. All right, breakout rooms are one way of breaking down that larger group or that larger meeting, so that the presenter or the facilitator might put a question to people, get them to ask or talk about an idea, and then they can send them off to breakout rooms. And you know, we've seen various different demonstrations and videos of this, but one way to do it is you set up a couple of rooms and you either pre-assign who's going to go there, or you can just get them to randomly go to different rooms. Now, the advantage of this is that there's only two people. So we're back to this scenario here, where the less people we have in a group, the less people we have in that sound stage, that bubble where that's all we can hear that's talking, then it's a bit easier to manage. But as the groups grow, of course, it becomes more difficult. So breakout rooms, they do have a limit. I forget what it is, I think it's 50 or so. And if you're starting to deal with really large audiences, then that can become a bit of a hassle. So these are the limitations and the way that Teams gets around it using breakout rooms. But here's where Altspace comes in. Now, I haven't spent a whole lot of time in Altspace, but I did jump into a session as a reminder to show myself or tell myself, yep, that's exactly what I thought, that's exactly how I thought it operated. How does Altspace work? Well, on this side of the board, everyone is in the same space. So let's just shift our attention over to this side here. When I beam into an Altspace, and it could be just the lobby or like the campfire scene or whatever, here I am. I'm over here. And as I come in, I can hear voices, I can hear people talking. But there's a spatial concept that over here, there's a couple of people talking, but it's slightly off distance. And if I'm closer to them and further away from this group of three, then I don't hear it, I don't hear the group of three as loudly as I do these two people here. So, you know, they could be talking away and they are discussing things, and I can choose to move over to this group of people, and then the conversation is louder because there's a spatial concept, and these people are quieter. Now, I've seen this work quite well in conferences and you know, little catch-ups after conferences, where you can move around the room and you can go over to a group of people and you can, you know, tune in and focus on what they're saying because they're closer to you. But the people that are further across the room or across the space, you don't actually focus on them because their voices are further off in the distance. You can probably still hear just a bit of them, but it's all about spatial distance and being closer to each other to hear that noise. So how does this work then when we might use this as a meeting space? What if Microsoft Teams was able to host an Altspace space as a meeting room, and you could beam in and use that, and you don't even have to use the crazy headset up there on top of my shelf. You could just use your flat web browser. So here's how I think it could work. You have a presenter, they're in that space, and I think I've seen this before in Altspace where people can stand beside a slide deck or whatever and motion to do various different things. But you've got your presenter and you've got groups of people that have initially, when they're starting off, they're in and around that initial presentation or around that initial part of the workshop. And so they're listening because they can hear the presenter, they're reasonably close. Now the presenter gets to a point where they say, right, we're going to go off to our breakout rooms. I want you to go over to the various different places in this space and start to talk through some of these questions and start to brainstorm and come up with ideas. And so the idea is that around this space, in this spatial thing, remember it is just it can be a web browser, you can probably experience it through your headset, but even if you were just zooming around using mouse controls and teleporting to different places, then maybe these two people here, they teleport over to this space, in the same space, but over here by a board, and they start to work through and talk through things. And so now you've got this distance between the presenter and maybe other groups that are also, you know, talking away and doing various things here and trying to figure stuff out. And so the breakout rooms are still within the same space. There's no kind of jarring, I'm going off to a breakout room, but instead you're beaming over to these different places, just around here. Now, because of the distance and that spatial concept, these people are hearing themselves much closer and louder than the people that are at a distance. So this is good. It means that they can focus, but they are also still part of that same room. Now, how about when a presenter needs to call people back or needs to communicate with everyone in this space? And this is where I think something of a CB radio kind of concept would quite work. The concept here is that they're over here in this space so everyone can hear the presenter. But if they're out over here, the presenter role allows the presenter to say something, and then let's just say it's just P to kind of represent. It's as if the presenter is beside each of these people, so they can all hear what the presenter's got to say. And he or she might put another question to them. We might call them back to this zone here to start talking. There's lots of possibilities here, but what I'm trying to get across is it solves this collision problem that we have within a regular Teams meeting where it's just one person at a time. I know that some people find this Altspace avatar character thing just a bit artificial. So there's options there, right? You don't have to necessarily use Altspace as it is. Potentially, if you wanted to make it a bit more personal, it could be just as simple as, you know, the person's smiley face or profile photo, and then, you know, a stick, and then something like that. I mean, I know that there's lots of creative people that can make this you know, more realistic and more friendly and more personable. But at least this, you can see that true representation of who they are. And with this space, I mean, imagine it just being like a tab within a Teams meeting where you can all go in and you can go into the spatial way of participating in a meeting. You start off here and then you break out to your rooms, breakout rooms 1 and 2. You can see maybe even the presenter or some people that are interested in content can wander over and they can, you know, there's no wall there, but by going closer to that group, they can focus on whatever they're working on over here to be able to, you know, participate and hear and maybe even get some inspiration. Maybe you do need walls. Maybe the point is that it's competition, so these spaces, they could operate like separate breakout rooms. But I really like this concept of, if I'm closer to you in this virtual space, then I can hear you, and the voices that are further away are much, much quieter. I think we can work on this. I think that AltspaceVR potentially could get together with Microsoft Teams meetings and have a baby, if that's what you call it, and come up with something like this. It would be really interesting to see. So that's me from Modern Workplace Change and my briefly from the board session, playing a bit with an overhead camera. We'll see you again next time. Bye for now.